go live to the UN headquarters. The President of Bolivia, Arce, addresses the general debate of the 78th session of the General Assembly.
Of this assembly, the most important multilateral body created by humanity, and we are convinced that along with President Denis Francis and his leadership, you will honor the names of our countries and our Latin American and Caribbean region. Distinguished heads of state, government, ministers of foreign affairs, brothers and sisters of delegations present here, good afternoon, one and all. Brother Vice President, a year ago in this same forum, we denounced the fact that the world was grappling with a capitalist crisis which was jeopardizing humanity and the very existence of this planet. And unfortunately, a year after that statement, that same delicate scene has not changed at all. The capitalist system, in its enthusiasm for imposing a decadent hegemony, is replicating practices of domination and colonial exploitation that need to be overcome. Unfortunately, many of the brilliant proposals that emerged within this assembly have been ignored, or they were simply omitted due to interests that are part and parcel of the savage capitalist system of exploitation, which prioritizes production and reproduction of capital rather than safeguarding the lives of human beings and the very existence of the planet. It is clear that we find ourselves before increasing precariousness of the economy due to the impact of the many bellicose conflicts that are shaking the world today. Peace and security are very much at risk, at imminent risk, given the lack of determination by the international community to propose solutions that would emphasize dialogue and put an end to bellicose efforts and warmongering promoted by the transnationals of war. To that, we must add the serious impact of the environmental crisis, the impact on all living systems in all corners of the world. According to experts, due to the prevailing system, we have exceeded 6 of the 9 planetary limits within which humanity and Mother Earth as a whole need to be able to live in order to continue developing and prospering. It's worth highlighting here that this tragic situation was further exacerbated in recent decades due to the unipolarity and unilateral inaction and due to unfulfilled commitments. Pending challenges continue to be many and enormous, and today we find ourselves, however, at the dawn of a new international configuration. We are convinced that we are bearing witness to the building of a new international order, a situation whereby the United Nations and the General Assembly needs to uphold the principles for which it was created and play a vital role. A new world order where we can all participate equally, with equal rights and obligations, without impositions of any kind, without any masters or slaves, without double standards to measure some and others, without sanctions or those that are sanctioned. This needs to be a new order where solidarity would prevail. Complementarity and collaboration need to go above and beyond egotism and pettiness. With that certainty, it is possible and necessary to create such a world, and the plurinational state of Bolivia to that end would like to share the following ideas and suggestions. First, we reiterate that, like we said last year, our proposal is that the world be declared as a territory of peace. We must put an end, once and for all, to the arms race, and we must prioritize dialogue, sincere dialogue and diplomacy amongst peoples in order to settle armed conflict that threatens the very existence of humanity. It is urgent that our nations unite in a collective effort, bringing together diverse voices, especially those from regions that are far removed from the rhetoric of confrontation, and yet these far removed peoples are those that suffer the repercussions from war in different dimensions. We need to give peace a chance, and in that endeavor, the Organization of the United Nations has a fundamental role to play in order to reduce tension and to make progress in dialogue that would make it possible to consolidate sound diplomatic policies and settlements of disputes which are on the agenda of our organization. And along these ideas, we'd like to reiterate our deep-seated concern due to the escalation of violence of the conflict in Eastern Europe and the threat of several countries to exacerbate the situation through confrontation and the use of weapons of mass destruction, weapons that use impoverished radioactive elements, and non-conventional weapons, which are banned by international law through various international instruments which are binding. We note with great alarm that military expenditures around the world have reached historical numbers. Up to April of 2023, the world invested more than $2.24 trillion in weapons and the industry of war. If those resources were to be invested in peace, in mediation, in dialogue, in the development of peoples, and invested in life rather than investing in destruction and death, we would not find ourselves on the verge of a crisis which further exacerbates inequality around the world and which are contrary to the very objectives set forth in this scenario and further exacerbate poverty around the world. The ways and means of waging war should not be unlimited. An increasing number of countries is seeking to use outer space in order to improve their military capacity with a view to protect their national security, and yet further endangering the peace and security of our planet in doing so. We deeply regret that maintaining peace and security has become a goal which is increasingly challenging. A genuine pace can only be achieved through the effective implementation of the mechanisms set forth in the United Nations Charter and in the complete elimination of all types of weapons. Bolivia will always be committed to defending and strengthening multilateralism and to continue to contribute to disarmament by upholding international law, international humanitarian law, and doing so from a vision based on peace and social justice, the well-being of people, and peaceful coexistence. We reiterate our regional commitment to proclaim Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace based on the promotion and respect of the proposals and principles set forth in the United Nations Charter and in international law. As we expressed in the context of the 7th Summit of Heads of State and Government of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC. Also, at this summit between the European Union and CELAC, which was held in Brussels last July, we indicated our desire to have a Latin American, Caribbean, and Europe living in peace. Our desire that our peoples would be able to bring about peace in a capitalist model which cannot actually offer us peace, and thereby abandon practices which in past histories have not been satisfactory in terms of achieving an equitable and complementary relationship between our regions. It's necessary to therefore break the international unfair order, which is smothering our peoples, and we feel it is time now to debate within the context of the United Nations how to build a new covenant for the future. But to do that, we need to recall the past. We need to resolve the present and prepare ourselves for the future. We are compelled to address the needs of present generations and future generations in an equitable manner. We cannot allow a child to die of hunger today in order to ensure the meal of a child that has not yet been born. Eliminating poverty and inequality today will prevent unimaginable conflicts of economic distribution and environmental conflict in the future. To build trust, we need to abandon petty interests and work through reciprocity. For example, by freeing all transfers of technology that enable us to save lives and restore Mother Earth. In order to revive global solidarity, we need to recognize each other and our relations within the context of all of us being humans. For example, in the context of climate change, let us recall that each state needs to earmark resources for the damage and loss fund, in proportion to the historic responsibility that should be shouldered with regard to producing greenhouse gases. Action for the Agenda 2030 will only be possible if we make peace and solidarity the driver of prosperity. We must be bold and transform war expenditures and those on death into investments for life. And with these resources, we can overcome and meet the goals of sustainable development. This is the only way to make Mother Earth sustainable within a space that functions in a safe way for all humanity. It's the only sustainable, fair, environmental, and socially appropriate way to convert the system into one that is progressive. We must achieve these goals in a fair and equitable manner for all, without any political or financial impositions. Third, it's necessary and urgent to change the capitalist system in a time of neoliberalism, which multiplies and reproduces forms of domination, exploitation, and exclusion for the great majority. Brothers and sisters, the multidimensional crisis of capitalism has been laid bare in the context of post-pandemic world and has been exacerbated by the effects of the military conflict in Eastern Europe. And these are nothing but manifestations of the transition towards a configuration of a world order which is different from the one we currently have. In response to this, and has never happened before, the global South is raising up in a peaceful and constructive manner. They are standing for regional and interregional processes of cooperation and integration. And the clamor has increased to reconfigure the international financial system and transform our understanding of what scientific development should be, that is respectful in turn of Mother Earth, and how to pursue this in an equitable manner while also recognizing the historical responsibilities that need to be shouldered vis-a-vis our nations and in all dimensions. Given the irreversible march towards a multipolar world, it is undeniable that each strength influences new initiatives and economic integration, trade, and cooperation amongst countries. The surgence and emergence of trade blocs such as Asia, Africa, South America, or the BRICS make it possible today for nations to have access to international markets without needing to compromise their sovereignty. And in that context, despite the adverse international context, Bolivia has implemented the Economic and Social Development Plan 2021-2025, which is entitled Rebuilding Our Economy to Live Well Towards Industrialization and Replacement of Imports. And this plan lays the foundation in order to grapple with the global economic crisis and to develop public policy to strengthen our national economy and promote our development capacity. And in this regard, action developed for the purposes of economic rebuilding and building our economic system to be more productive exceeded 6% in 2021, and management in 2022 achieved 3.5%. And in 2022, our nominal GDP increased by $40,703 billion in 2021 and reached $44 billion in 2022, which is the highest figure in our history. Likewise, the GDP per capita increased by 7.4% over the figure for 2021, achieving a figure of $3.6 billion, again, the highest figure in the history of our country. I should also mention here that what is happening this year, we see accumulated inflation, which is only of 1.6%, which is the lowest figure for our region and much lower than many countries on the planet. This indicator was achieved by us without raising interest rates, without practicing neoliberal monetary policy, and especially without reaching into the pockets of the poorest of our people, which is where inflation lives. The achievements of our country are based mainly on a horizon which is a civilizing horizon based on living well and reivindicating the culture and life of a community, respecting living together in harmony, in balance, and in complementarity with all other human beings, while also being in harmony with Mother Earth and nature. 4. The climate crisis requires concrete action and renewed commitments. Bolivia has suggested, through recognition of the Mother Earth in the General Assembly and through the resolution approved in April of 2009, an effort for the entire international community to become aware of the importance of restoring our natural processes for the very survival of the human being on this planet, and providing for an alternative vision to, which is anti-colonial, an alternative to capitalism and mercantilism. In this understanding, our vision is based on sustainability of development and is deeply rooted in our vision of living well and in harmony with nature. This vision is born of the millennial and ancestral thoughts of our peoples and the indigenous peoples in our nations, which are the very foundation of our plurinationality. With regard to increasing needs and mitigation of adaptation to the climate crisis and the losses and growing damage, it's important that all countries assume their responsibilities. And in this context, the developed nations must assume their share of responsibility due to the climate debt and compensation for historical reparation to developing countries. The first step is to fulfill their promises and meet the pledges with regard to financial provision, transfer of technology, and capacity building. In this problematic world, one common denominator is the issue of fragmenting countries for the most poor, and the scarcity of water is only increasing with the evaporation of fresh water. We urge this Assembly to provide action and address this problem, a problem which is affecting the poorest of the 5 continents and which is beginning to affect all sectors of society. Bolivia would highlight here that this year, by consensus, the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, the BBNJ, was adopted by consensus because it is a significant step towards protecting our oceans and the sustainability and use of our resources, benefiting the developed nations especially those that are landlocked. This treaty will establish rules and regulations to prevent the sustainable exploitation of resources, will protect the interests of landlocked countries, and will prevent the exhaustion of marine resources. The BBNJ Treaty is a historic opportunity to mark the difference in protecting our oceans because they are a common good of all humanity. And in this context, we highlight the special mention for the indigenous peoples and landlocked countries. Together, we can ensure that the oceans will continue to be sources of life and prosperity for present generation and future generations in an equitable manner. 5, we must continue promoting a broader view of human rights and democracy. Despite the progress achieved, the world continues to be an unequal world. And while it's true that peoples shape their own destiny, it is also true that for our peoples to live well, this has been undermined for centuries due to legal, economic, and ideological colonialism. You know better than anyone that it has not been possible to exercise the right to development due to history. The systematic transfer of wealth from the south to the north has put us at a disadvantage up until today. We have had to navigate the waters of a crisis imposed only on the South, which is not the same than to talk about economic, social, and cultural rights as to talk about health, education, food, access to knowledge, and technology in a continent where, in another, in the South and in the North, it's not the same. In this context, it's not possible to plan without also addressing the historical responsibilities. Without assuming those responsibilities, we cannot fulfill our potential as peoples and make possible our right to development. In the plurinational state of Bolivia, we have understood that democracy is not possible without development, and development cannot have better indicators than the exercise of collective rights, rights that are promoted, protected, and guaranteed by the state, but rights also that go hand in hand with a high level of democratic participation of social collectives. In Bolivia, we have understood that economic stability also requires substantive change in food sovereignty, access to intercultural and multilingual education, in sexual and reproductive health for Bolivian women. From our experience, I would like to highlight that the active participation of indigenous peoples in the affairs of state has made our recent achievements possible, and that is why I call on this assembly to continue making progress towards strengthening the rights and participation of indigenous peoples. Another topic of great interest to my country are the rights of women. It is estimated that in the world 736 million women, that is 1 out of 3 women around the world, have been victims of physical violence or sexual violence. Violence suffered by women needs to stop being a solitary and private experience, and it needs to be recognized as a public issue on which we need to take urgent action. Maternal mortality is another great issue we must grapple with, since every day 800 women die due to pregnancy-related complications. Sustainable development will not be possible if we do not provide women with an opportunity to live without fear of violence and to exercise their reproductive and sexual rights with access to universal health care. 6, unearthing or stopping the international system of implementing sanctions and unilateral coercive action. We need to uproot this. Brother Vice President, another topic that I could not but mention on this opportunity is that relates to unilateral coercive measures and sanctions that are imposed on brother peoples, undermining their ability to develop the most basic human rights. These measures are a reflection of a dysfunctional system which is far removed from international law and multilateral. It's a clear examples of these measures, which is illegal, inhuman, and criminal, is the economic and financial embargo imposed by the United States against Cuba. The restrictions imposed make it difficult to have access to food, medicine, and other basic goods, creating human suffering which impacts their economy and development. We call for the compliance with the many resolutions adopted by this General Assembly and to build a world that's fair and more solidarity, where all countries can prosper without regard to their political differences. We also reject and condemn the inclusion of Cuba as a promoter of terrorism on the unilateral lists of the United States, using this argument to impose greater restrictive measures against the Cuban people. These measures run counter to the United Nations Charter and the mandate of the Security Council, and that is why they are not supported by, nor are they valid in light of international law, but still, they very much affect the right to development of the Cuban people. 7, we must stop as soon as possible the trampling of the Palestinian people. With regard to the Israeli occupation of Palestine, we cannot continue allowing the suffering of the Palestinian people. Reiterate our support to world and regional initiatives, international law, and the United Nations resolutions that seek to guarantee a solution whereby the Palestinian people can exercise its right to self-determination and build its own state, which is free, independent, and sovereign within the borders, pre-1967 borders, and with East Jerusalem as its capital. Finally, brothers and sisters, the current crisis urgently requires a United Nations organization that stands strong, that upholds the principles that created it, that is committed to peace, and that maintains its intergovernmental nature without, however, subordination to any hegemonic power, be it economic, political, or military. because the solutions to the many challenges facing humanity will only become a reality with sincere commitment and the political determination of all countries and their actors, and prioritizing the common interests of humankind and of especially the most vulnerable people and sectors of humanity. Thank you.
A nombre de la Asamblea,
We were listening to the statements of the Bolivian President of the 78th UN General Assembly. Luis Arce denounced the capitalist system that over decades has imposed hegemonism and colonialism. Arce added that peace and security are at risk because the international community lacks the will to address the issue against warmongering transnationals. Arce also said that to be convinced that a new international order was dawning and called on the UN to play the role for which it was created, a new order of solidarity and cooperation. The Bolivian president called on world authorities to unite to declare the world a world of peace and carry through endeavors to end conflicts and the arms race. Arce warned that military investments have reached historical heights, adding that if those resources were better used in creating bridges of peace, the world would not find itself in the security crisis it is experiencing. President Arce said Bolivia will always be committed to bring an end to conflict and promote disarmament and work for the well-being of peoples across the world to bring social justice. He also condemned the U.S. blockade against the Cuban island and pledged his support to the Palestinian cause. Stay tuned with teleSUR English for more on the 78th General Assembly of the United Nations.